This video is part of our Ultimate Study Skills series, and today we'll be covering a technique that allows us to learn fast without sacrificing on comprehension. So our friend Justin Sung actually teaches this in his course, and it's called Learning in Layers. So let's say we're learning how to build a house. It'd make the most sense to build the foundation first, right? This includes the walls, the structure, and this all represents the main concepts of what we're learning. That's layer number one. Then we would add on supporting stuff like the roof, some electrical, some plumbing, and this all represents the supporting details. That's layer number two. At this point, we have a fully functioning house, but obviously there's still more we can add to make the house comfy, right? Maybe a couch, a lamp, some picture frames on the walls or something. These are nice things to have, but we don't really need this furniture to survive, so we're gonna call these the less important details. This is layer number three. So layer one is concepts, and layers 2 and 3 are both details. But how do we differentiate between layers 2 and 3? Well, layer 2 actually helps us understand layer 1 better, whereas layer 3 normally doesn't. For example, if I'm studying the concept of photosynthesis, then a layer 2 detail would be understanding that water, sunlight, carbon dioxide is transformed into oxygen. That's a detail that helps me better understand photosynthesis, right? That's the layer 2 detail. A layer 3 detail would be knowing something like the name of the enzyme that drives that transformation, which I don't even know the name of that enzyme, right? It's not that important, but obviously we're still gonna be tested on it, so layer 3 is usually what I would put on my flashcards to be memorized. And if we follow the 80-20 rule, usually 80% of exam questions will be on layers 1 and 2, but usually those two layers make up only 20% of the material that you need to know. And I think the hardest part about learning is being able to differentiate what detail is more important and what detail is less important. Basically knowing which topics and key terms belong to which layer. And unfortunately, the skill isn't taught in school. You'll notice that if you read a textbook from start to finish, the order of information that comes at you is first you'll get a heading or main idea, followed by loads of detail that you kind of just gotta sift through, right? Then you'll get another heading, main idea, followed by details, another heading, followed by details, right? This is the same pattern that most professors teach in lecture too. Instead of giving us all the foundational pieces first to help us build our structure, they give us all the pieces for one room at a time. We don't move on to the kitchen until we've completely built the bathroom first. And this approach makes this house overall super unstable, right? It might seem like an efficient way to teach, but I don't think it's an efficient way to learn. So here's a step-by-step of learning in layers. Step one is to start with a list of key terms. You want to have all the pieces laid out in front of you, and you can find this in the learning objectives of the chapters or from the syllabus itself. Step two is to categorize the key terms into one of the 3 layers. Is it a concept? Is it an important detail? Or is it a less important detail? And then step 3, you want to build your house layer by layer, right? On the first pass of the material, you want to focus on the concepts. Then you come back for the important details. Then you come back for the less important details. So let's see these steps in action using microbiology as an example. For step 1, here I have a list of all the key terms for multiple chapters. Just a side note, for beginners, I'd recommend doing this one chapter at a time. But when you get the hang of it, you can definitely try multiple chapters because it's much more efficient. For step 2, I'm going to categorize the terms into the 3 layers. It really helps to compare and contrast all the key terms against each other to figure out where they belong. So first, what is a gram stain? A gram stain is a laboratory technique that we use to identify bacteria. I'm not exactly sure what layer gram stain is at the moment. Is it a concept? Is it a detail? I don't really have anything else to compare it to. So let's move on, and then maybe I'll learn something later that will help me better understand where this fits in the big picture. So next, what is a gram-positive bacteria? All right, so it's basically a bacteria with a thick cell wall. How does it relate to gram stain? Well, if you gram stain a positive bacteria, then it'll turn purple under a microscope. So we see some sort of functional relationship between these terms. Let's keep that in mind and move on to the next. What is a gram-negative bacteria? All right, we have another term with the word gram in it. Gram-negatives have a thin cell wall, and if you compare and contrast that to a gram-positive, this one usually gram stains red under a microscope. So the idea of gram staining is a concept. So you see, the more we learn, the easier it becomes to put these terms in layers. All right, next, what is a Staphylococcus aureus? It's a type of gram-positive bacteria. This next one is Clostridium difficile. It's also a gram-positive. Next, we have toxin A. This is a toxin that's released by Clostridium, so it's a detail of that. Next is Klebsiella pneumonia. This one's a gram-negative bacteria. And we just keep going until we finish categorizing and grouping all these key terms together. Step 3 is to build our house layer by layer. And what better way to map something out in your head than mind mapping? So I'm going to start by placing all of layer 1 on the page. So I think the most important part of this step is figuring out how the different components of layer 1 relate to each other. For example, here, it becomes clear to me that we group bacteria based on their characteristics, right? Gram-positive, gram-negative, etc. Because those characteristics are how we identify them, which then tells us what antibiotics to use to treat them. That's the big picture right there, right? That's what I'm talking about when I say lay the foundation first with the layer 1 concepts. So once all of layer 1 is connected on the page and we have a good core foundation, we can add the details on top, starting with layer 2 and then layer 3. Now, the usual way that students mind map is to kind of build out each branch all the way out to the details before moving on to the next branch. This is not learning in layers, and you'll easily lose sight of the big picture. If I were speed learning or even cramming the night before an exam, which I don't advise, and I wanted to make sure I don't fail that exam, then I would focus on the red and blue layers first, since that will be the majority of the test, right? 80-20. But if I didn't go in layers, I might not even have time to cover all the important stuff because I was too busy with the less important details. So that was a simplified version of learning in layers. Justin covers it more comprehensively and even adds an extra layer that can be helpful for bigger, more complex topics. So check out his channel for that. I want to point out that the mind map we made here is only the first draft, right? But the more I learn and the more microbiology chapters I add to this map, the more I'll need to rearrange my thinking and make my notes more concise. Now, if you want a deeper dive into the skill of mind mapping itself, then check out this video right here. It's a great skill to pair with this entire layer method. I'll see you there.